In the shadows of the Caribbean sun, one man's empire flourished while his unscrupulous dealings remained hidden beneath the surface. A scheme so vast, so intricate, it would soon be revealed to be one of the largest Ponzi operations in history. A staggering $7 billion. This is the story of Allen Stanford, the once revered financier who would fall from grace, exposing an intricate web of deceit, greed, and shattered dreams. Born on March 24, 1950, in Mexia, Texas, Allen Stanford had a charismatic allure, exuding confidence and charm that would draw investors into his orbit. His rise to prominence began with a series of lucrative business ventures in the early 2000s, focusing on offshore banking and investments. Stanford's signature move? The Stanford International Bank, based in Antigua, which promised extraordinarily high returns on certificates of deposit, returns that seemingly defied the laws of finance. At their peak, the bank offered interest rates as high as 12%, a siren song to those looking for an escape from traditional investment options amid a tumultuous economic landscape. But behind this facade of success, Stanford was allegedly orchestrating a criminal enterprise that would ultimately defraud thousands. Allegations suggest that he was the architect of a vast Ponzi scheme that preyed on the elderly and the financially vulnerable, luring them into a web of deceit that spanned decades. In an era of digital communication, Stanford sold a dream, a lavish lifestyle, a promise of financial security, by constructing an empire built on lies. As his bright smile graced magazine covers and his name became synonymous with offshore investing, many believed they were placing their trust in a financial titan, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath. In 2008, Stanford's empire began to unravel. Over the course of several years, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission received numerous complaints regarding Stanford's operations. Yet, it would take a dramatic series of events for the truth to emerge. The swirling storm of financial insecurity and the collapse of Wall Street in 2008 created an environment ripe for scrutiny. That July, the first cracks began to show when investment analyst and former Florida Commissioner Angela S. McCulley publicly called out the inconsistencies in Stanford's offshore operations, prompting the SEC to finally launch an investigation. In February of 2009, under mounting pressure from investors and regulators, the SEC launched a full-scale investigation. This culminated in a bombshell announcement on February 17th, when Stanford was accused of orchestrating a massive Ponzi scheme that had defrauded investors of, you guessed it, $7 billion. U.S. authorities described Stanford's operation as one of the largest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history, rivaling even the infamous Bernie Madoff. At the heart of the operation lay the promise of guaranteed returns, funded by a constant influx of new investor capital. Stanford reportedly made grand claims of success, often citing fictitious investments in high-yield asset portfolios. While investors believed their money was fueling legit business endeavors, it was instead being funneled into a convoluted financial architecture designed solely to benefit Stanford and his associates. Sophisticated marketing tactics helped mask the operation's true nature. He utilized lavish marketing campaigns, including magazine ads featuring exotic islands, luxury yachts, and opulent lifestyles. The advertising was purposefully designed to evoke trustworthiness. Beachfront villas symbolized successful living, while Stanford himself became the charming face of financial advisory. The illusion of credibility swayed many, drawing them into an enticing world wrapped in promises they couldn't ignore. Yet the reality was starkly different. Investors felt they were taking part in a risky investment, and it drove a desire to secure their funds, leaving them oblivious to the truth. While Stanford promised lofty returns, it's believed that funds from new investors were simply used to pay existing ones, the classic telltale sign of a Ponzi scheme. With every check he wrote to cover early withdrawals, the scheme expanded, his coffers swelling, while the reality of his financial health remained hidden in the dark. The greed, however, would ultimately be Stanford's downfall. As the financial crisis loomed and the markets began to falter, investors grew restless, demanding returns that Stanford could no longer fulfill. By January of 2009, the first wave of withdrawals triggered panic within his operation. Desperation set in as the house of cards stood precariously, and the floodgates began to open. Investor trust had reached a critical threshold. Should Stanford continue to meet demand, the scheme could implode at any moment. With each new day came more scrutiny, more complaints, and ultimately, the tipping point. On the morning of February 17th, Stanford's world crumbled as the SEC served him with a court order. Agents swiftly moved to seize control of his assets. Headlines around the globe echoed the downfall of a financial giant whose empire was built on betrayal. Just days later, Stanford's arrest would send shockwaves throughout the international financial community. Facing a total of 13 counts, including conspiracy, wire fraud, and mail fraud, the SEC painted a picture of a ruthless operator who had turned investor trust into a personal fortune. Reports estimated that at least 30,000 investors had poured their savings into Stanford's operations, many of whom stood to lose everything. On March 6, 2009, Stanford faced a federal court in the Southern District of Florida. The prosecution, armed with mounting evidence of fraud, declared him an unscrupulous swindler. It would take 4 years for the legal proceedings to reach a conclusion. Ultimately, in 2012, Allen Stanford was found guilty of 17 counts of fraud. The jury delivered a stout verdict, a sentence of 110 years in federal prison. Yet the fallout for victims would last far beyond the courtroom. As the dust settled, ordinary people were left to pick up the pieces of shattered lives. Retirement funds depleted, dreams dashed, families torn apart by financial burdens they couldn't comprehend. From lifelong savings to college funds meant for their children, many victims became collateral damage in Stanford's greed-driven scheme. In the years that followed his sentencing, efforts to recover funds for victims remained a monumental task. The court-appointed receiver sought to claw back the remaining assets believed to remain in his name and distribute them fairly among the scammed investors. By 2023, more than $450 million had been reclaimed and handed back to victims. Yet for many, it would only represent a fraction of what they lost. Despite the chaotic aftermath, Allen Stanford's legacy is one of a staggering cautionary tale, an opponent to ethical finance, the ultimate warning of the dangers that reside within promising returns. The heartbreak and devastation left in the wake of his actions serve as a stark reminder of how easily trust can be exploited and how one man's ambition can lead to the collapse of thousands. In the end, Allen Stanford would become an emblematic representation of both the allure and the peril of unchecked capitalism, a specter haunting the financial world, reminding us all that in the quest for wealth, the truth is often hidden beneath layers of deceit, waiting for the light of scrutiny to finally unveil it. As authorities grapple with lessons learned from Stanford's saga, investors now tread more cautiously. Transparency is being prioritized, regulatory measures have been tightened, and potential investors are expressing wariness of promises that seem too good to be true. Allen Stanford may be imprisoned, but the echoes of his actions continue to resonate, a reminder of the thin line between ambition and greed. If you found this story interesting, hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep making these videos. Tomorrow, we are diving into a story that is just as shocking. Tom Petter's The $3.6 billion scheme. You will not want to miss it. I will see you there.